Thank you all for joining us for our exciting Logi-Serve webinar today. It is my pleasure to introduce our two presenters for today. First, Dr. Chris Cunningham, Logi-Serve's Chief Science Officer. Chris is a founder of Logi-Serve, and in his capacity as CSO, is in charge of all science and validation work associated with the development and deployment of Logi-Serve products. Chris is also a UC Foundation professor and graduate faculty member in the Department of Psychology at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, where he is also the Industrial and Organizational Psychology Graduate Program Director. Chris was also recently elected president at the Society for Occupational Health Psychology. Additionally, I am honored to introduce John Leech, Director of Talent Acquisition with St. Jude's Children's Hospital. In John's role, he is responsible for the oversight and management of all aspects of the talent sourcing, qualifying, and recruiting process. John brings over 20 years of experience to St. Jude with previous roles such as Senior Director of Recruitment with Comcast, Senior Director of Talent Acquisition with C&S Wholesale Grocers, and Director of Recruitment with Federal Express. Welcome, Chris and John. Chris, let's turn it over to you to begin our session today.
Our objective today is to focus in on helping you understand how and why an interactive, realistic job preview can make a positive difference in your talent acquisition process. And there's a number of reasons for this that we're going to dive into here with a little more detail over the course of this webinar, but you can see them kind of outlined on the slide here. And as we go deeper into this today, as Bill mentioned, there is opportunity at the end for us to answer questions that might arise for you as we work through. So let's try to keep that as interactive as we can toward the end especially, but we appreciate your attention and your interest in this topic. I just want to highlight some other key features that are important to understand about this interactive realistic job preview. So number one, this is a flexible system that is designed to yield value for any position in any industry. The IRJP is set up to provide information to candidates in an accessible, digestible, and engaging way. So this interface that we've developed also provides an opportunity for branding for organizations when they're trying to push out critical cues about their cultural elements and the things that they identify as important, the things they value. This is extremely flexible within this system, and it also creates a fun interface for candidates without the limitations that come when systems that are high in computing resources, say with high fidelity videos or computer simulations are used. This can often stand in the way of individuals being able to access that information. Now, going one step further, one of the key benefits of the IRJP is our ability to engage candidates with information in an interactive way. So what I mean by that is that this system is designed to essentially push out critical information to candidates while pulling back in information based on how the candidate is reacting to what they're seeing. And so this pushing and pulling is a structured way of engaging candidates so they process the information they're being given. This takes it to a whole new level beyond what a general job description or online job posting would do for a candidate, because now you know with this pushing and pulling process that the candidate is actually thinking about the cues that you're pushing forward. The purpose of this illustration is to help you see how and where this IRJP could fit into this process. So you can note that, a standard beginning point for a candidate is through some sort of jobs or careers page, and then diving in to take a look at the available openings, maybe finding a specific role, in this case administrative role, and then selecting a job to view details. And at this point, they're able to dive in to this interactive realistic job preview to really learn more about what this position would entail, what it would offer, and so on. Once a candidate has gone through this, then they are now educated and informed and empowered to go further in that application process. Or after they've reviewed the information about this position, if they've decided, yeah, this really isn't a good fit for me, they can opt out and go and return to search for other open positions that might be a better fit for them. This process is designed, and this technology, this IRJP technology, is designed to be integrated either in line like this with an ATS or function as a standalone tool. And that makes it really flexible for any type of organizational situation. Now, John, I'd like to get you to people have a chance to hear your voice. So maybe you could speak to this slide a little bit about the branding and the value of branding to attract and retain.
For St. Jude, brand is something that we're extremely proud of, where people realize that our mission is to find cures and save children, but it extends into this employment brand that can often be confusing for a candidate. And for this particular example, we look at our pediatric oncology nurses. Where most of the nurses would feel that I would love to take care of really sick children. The branding that we had basically just allowed every pediatric oncology nurse to apply. And what we found is that the turnover was fairly high, because as they became indoctrinated into the St. Jude way, they realized dealing with critically ill children. We treat some of the sickest children on the planet, and that can lead to difficulty in coming back to your job after the loss of a patient that you had been working with for several years. So for us, we wanted to try to bring an employment brand that allowed the applicant to understand a little bit more about what is different in the positions here at St. Jude, and try to bring that honesty that, hey, it's a tough job, a very rewarding job, and very fulfilling to be a part of such a strong mission. But it needs to provide that information, allowing that particular applicant to decide whether this is a good fit for them or not. It's interesting that one of the first employee resource groups that we had at St. Jude was not your typical employee resource group, but it was for grief. And as we dealt with the difficulties that we find in this job, so bringing that honesty forward into the job description, and then moving it towards a interactive, realistic job preview allowed us to provide this insight to a candidate, so that we could reduce the number of nurse applicants that are attracted to helping sick children, and allowed them to really see the ins and outs of the job. And that allowed us to help reduce the costs that we had in scanning through a lot of applicants that really, in the long term aspect, would not be a good fit, and reducing our turnover to be able to understand that, wow, how do you react to a situation where you develop, and in most cases, the nurses are developing a relationship over a 2 to 3 week period, still getting attached, but not as attached as a nurse here that might have a 2 to 3 year relationship. So it allowed us not only to become more effective in our recruitment and scanning through the best and the brightest, but then also improving our retention rates at the same time.
Thanks a lot, John. I appreciate that input. And so this idea of informative and educational branding is really one of the key ways that we use the IRJP to dramatically improve the candidate experience. So one way to look at this is by meeting candidates where they are, speaking to their needs, stimulating their interest, and engaging them with an authentic picture of what it would be like to actually work here and in this position. You have an opportunity with the IRJP to build momentum that can carry a candidate through even the most extensive talent acquisition process. What's also important is that informing candidates up front like this also better prepares them for a meaningful interview if you have one embedded in your process later on. And that's a point we can speak to a little bit later. One other detail that I want to make sure that we can speak about here is that within the IRJP, we built this not only to improve the candidate experience, but also to improve the user experience. And as I mentioned before, we are pulling and pushing information back and forth throughout the candidate's experience with this tool. And what that does is generate a lot of useful information. So beyond a great candidate experience, this system generates meaningful insights and intelligence for members of your talent acquisition and your broader talent management teams. You're able to learn things from your applicant pool that you might never have otherwise known. For example, figuring out what the most and least attractive job features actually are in the eyes of candidates. Figuring out which elements of the job are perceived as most challenging and most difficult, but also most exciting and most rewarding to candidates. understanding the general skill set that these candidates self-report and their levels of confidence in being able to handle the challenges that people typically face. You have an opportunity now to study these patterns at an aggregate level and know if you're even speaking to the appropriate applicant pool. And that's tremendously valuable.
Yeah, and a quick comment on this, that we were flying with the information that we had from Google Analytics on visitors to our careers website and how they interacted with the not only the job description itself, but as it transitioned over into the application. So the information that we were able to gain through the reporting through Logi-Serve, like you said, really opened our eyes to a lot more valuable information about what was important and what wasn't important in the eyes of a candidate. And we are using that data today to emphasize differences in our employment branding initiatives, how we write job descriptions, the advertising that we use, as well as putting candidate personas together to really understand more about what the type of the individual is and what would appeal most to them, so that we can speak to that not only through the application process, but like you said, in through the interview, inform the hiring manager and have the hiring managers be able to enforce the same fit that we've realized during the IRJP.
That's great. Well, I'm actually going to turn this over more to John here for the next few slides. I was thinking that to help the audience understand the use case for this and how it's rolled out for you, John, maybe you could cover the next several slides and illustrate how you and your team are using this IRJP to address some of the challenges at St. Jude.
Well, for us, it really started with the challenges of this transition for us in an expansion at St. Jude, where we were challenged to hire 1,500 people over the next 5 years. And we realized that by doing it the same way, we weren't just going to be able to hit what it is that our goal was presented to us to do. So we looked at both improving the candidate experience, which I think a lot of organizations are focused on, but also the hiring manager satisfaction of what we do and how we do it. But that first piece for us, and being a very scientific organization, St. Jude really built on this flavor of innovation, that we knew that we had to try something new, and that we needed the recruiters to feel comfortable in exploring new ways of interacting with our candidates. So for us, we looked at this as a scientific experiment, as what could we do that would better the experience as well as the end result of hiring high quality candidates for St. Jude. So that job seeker experience, we're still not out of the woods, as I think a lot of organizations are in this pursuit with us, but trying to figure out how and what we do and how it impacts. We've also, over the last year and a half, we're measuring the job seeker experience at multiple levels. So as we take them from that unaware to aware, aware to in process, and in process into the pre-screening tools, we're able to measure each step of the way, not only in just the experience, but how it impacts, everything from will they come back to St. Jude? Would they refer others to St. Jude, and kind of looking at it from those lenses. In some cases, like in nursing, we're very fortunate that our brand of St. Jude drives a large volume of applicants. What we find is that a lot of those applicants are just wanting to get their foot in the door, which leads them to be not as qualified as we would like. So trying to pull those things together and provide a top experience for that as well is one of the reasons that we lean towards the Logi-Serve tool. Some of the other things that we were trying to fix that really aren't in control of talent acquisition per se on the back end, but we know that we can influence it, is the turnover and the understanding of, wow, what's written on a piece of paper, it's hard to bring that emotion and that real feel for the demands of the job. And so is there a better way that we could do that? We looked at video, we looked at a picture's worth 1,000 words and adding those to our job description, but feel that providing this immersive experience where there's interaction should be able to provide us with a much better control on that experience. The feedback then on the applicant side, I think, is also critical for us to know how we have things shaped, and do we have not only the right applicants for the job, but do we have the right recruiters to recruit those applicants into the position, and trying to find that fit where they will work together throughout the selection process. So the feedback mechanism for us, I think, is extremely important. Now, a lot of these challenges, are heightened in the fact that we're at a very low unemployment rate nationwide. Healthcare continues to be a very high targeted area for low unemployment rates, and making it even more difficult. So as we shift over the last couple years to not seeing as high a volume, we are now depending more on our talent pipelines to feed those applicant pools into the process, but still need the same quality control to make sure that we have the best and the brightest aligned for each and every position.
Appreciate that overview, John. And what we have now are just a few slides to summarize the challenges and the outcomes that came along with it. And I'd be happy to provide an overview, and then if you want to chime in with any additional kind of flavor on these, feel free to do so. But with respect to the first challenge about needing to improve that front-end candidate experience, we were tracking through the actual interactive realistic job preview how candidates were reacting to different elements. And these are some example statements that we monitor and measure. And on a scale of 1 to 100, all of these received ratings greater than 90 out of 100, which is extremely positive rating. And what it kind of helps to express is that the candidates are seeing this IRJP as a valuable use of their time, as a helpful source of information that allowed them to really strengthen or solidify the way they felt about applying for this position within St. Jude. So for us, this is evidence that this IRJP is able to enhance and sustain that positive job seeker reaction.
Yeah, and for us, it's the same, that as we innovate and we look at new ways of doing things, we want to make sure that they are benefiting the areas that we're trying to target. So being able to get the feedback from the applicants themselves and what they liked and they didn't like, and really kind of help close that loop for us on the candidate feedback. Stepping out into doing something new and different, definitely has its risks. And we were worried that the length of time that it took to have an individual go through the IRJP would be detrimental rather than a positive. And as you can see from some of the comments that we received, that it was very well spent, that they're even more attracted to St. Jude, and that it has helped them understand what is the role that they're applying to. So for us, this was extremely positive feedback, and allowing us to understand that, hey, the risk was worth what we went through, because the reward is great in expanding not only the visibility that we have into that candidate segment, but then for them to be able to have the same view into St. Jude. It's very refreshing for us. So now it's fed us into, hey, how else can we use this across St. Jude? And I think that you spoke to it a little bit earlier in our looks at expanding this into other high demand areas. So we'll be rolling this out hopefully within the next couple months for administrative professionals here at St. Jude, because we're excited about the positive feedback that people have received, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same thing with this next target group.
Yeah. Now, the second round of outcomes we looked at was the ability to have an impact on the quality of the applicants as they go through the process. And one of the ways that this is being tracked at St. Jude are by ratings by recruiters as they work their way through the process. And we saw a reduction in poor quality and an increase in high quality applicants of around 20% through this process compared to historical numbers. And one of the big reasons for this is that this tool, again, is educating and empowering the job seekers to self-select in or out of the process. So the ones that are continuing on have a realistic and a clear sense of what this job is going to entail, and that allows them to better gauge, am I cut out for this? Is this likely to be a good fit? And that transcends into better performance through the application process.
Yeah, I heard from our recruiters that I've got too many applicants and not enough good applicants, but yet you're asking me to connect with each and every one of them to try to provide a better candidate experience. And that's pretty demanding, especially when you've got 30, 40 requisitions and 300 to 400 applicants per requisition. So they were really reaching out to leadership and saying, hey, is there any way that you can reduce the number of the candidates that don't even meet the basic qualifications or barely meet, and get those off their plate so they can focus on the good ones. And being able to use this tool, like you said, it drastically reduced the poor quality applicants. But what we didn't realize initially was it actually provided a better experience for those that weren't going to fit the job to begin with, because at the end of the IRJP, we would recommend, hey, we don't think this is probably the best job for you. Would you be interested in applying for another job at St. Jude? So we were actively be able to move those individuals over to positions that might be more pertinent for them based off of their experience. So a better experience for them, happier recruiters that have more qualified and fewer unqualified candidates. It ended up being a win-win.
Yep. And then the final outcome that I'll just speak to briefly here is that we were able to gather a tremendous amount of data and insight from the candidates who were going through this IRJP. And some examples of some of the insights and intelligence we were able to share back to St. Jude were preferred salaries for this applicant pool for this type of position, clear indications of the most and least attractive core job features, clear indications of what aspects of the St. Jude culture are most challenging and most exciting to them, and even limits, it's identifying limits in their technology experiences and skill sets that could help the recruiters know, again, if they're speaking to the best possible applicant pool for this position. So these are just some examples to help you understand how this IRJP is actually implemented and is creating value for St. Jude. And you can imagine how some of these very same outcomes could be valuable within your own organization. I want to just kind of do a little bit of recapping here before we bring this session to a close and open it up for some Q&A. And I'd just like to highlight that, this tool has been designed around the science of applicant attraction and recruitment to help engage job-seeking candidates in an active information exchange. And so by building a system that makes it possible to signal and gather this important information, but also to get that information from the candidate back to the organization, we've created a new feedback loop that didn't normally exist and doesn't normally exist for most organizations. That, in addition to this ability to create a more engaging kind of front end or threshold experience for candidates, means that we've created a solution that is somewhat fun, and it pulls the candidates in and helps them explore a job to a much deeper level than they ever would when presented with a long narrative job description or with a brief kind of post that you might see on a social media page, for example. As noted earlier, the data that we pull in through the candidate reactions throughout this IRJP is able to provide meaningful insights to your talent acquisition personnel. And John's presented some great examples of this, and I also just summarized a few for you a couple slides ago. But this is a really important point that can't be, overstated, is that we have an opportunity with this tool now to actually understand the mindset, the perspective, the skill set, really start to understand this applicant pool before we even begin formally screening them for these roles. You can just imagine the possibilities for strategically improving your talent acquisition process. So I think, as we've illustrated with this presentation today, this partnership between our two innovative organizations is valuable, and it demonstrates how this interactive realistic job preview can play an important role in your talent acquisition workflow. So as we kind of bring this to a close, we have a couple of summary points here to offer. And then we're going to open this up to some question and answer. John, were there any other points you'd like to emphasize? I know your front-end experience got a little cut, so I want to make sure you have a chance to offer any other feedback that you had.
Yeah, so I think that these summary bullets are spot on. The candidate participating in the selection for us continues to be something that we want to move forward. How are we able to allow them to be active in their own selection for whether it's a good fit on their end, and then allowing us to determine the same on our end. Really trying to bridge that gap. So we feel very strongly that this tool has allowed us to do that.
Appreciate that, John. And as I also mentioned very early in this session, we have provided or assembled a couple of readings for those of you that might be curious to dig more deeply into the science that is underneath this tool. These are all examples of top-notch research that's being used to guide sort of the future of talent acquisition, especially with respect to realistic job previews. And all of this has been pulled into the design and the implementation of this IRJP product.